The antiseptic smell of the hospital room couldn't mask the scent of approaching death. Marigold's breath came in shallow whispers, her once vibrant face now hollow and gray. I sat beside her, holding a hand that felt like brittle autumn leaves. The cancer had consumed her so quickly, leaving behind only a shadow of my once vivacious sister. "Eleanor," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "you're the only one who came." I squeezed her hand gently, fighting back tears. "I'll always come for you, Mary." The truth hung between us, unspoken but undeniable. Her children, my niece and nephew, hadn't visited once during her 3-week hospital stay. Neither had her ex-husband or any of our other relatives. 37 years of family rifts, bitter arguments, and unforgivable words had left Marigold alone with only me at her bedside. "They blame me," she whispered, "for everything." I stroked her paper-thin skin. "Don't think about that now." Her eyes suddenly focused, a momentary clarity breaking through the morphine haze. With unexpected strength, she gripped my wrist. "Listen carefully, Ellie. There's a small safe behind the painting in my bedroom, the watercolor of Emerald Lake. Take this key and open it." From beneath her pillow, she pulled out an old-fashioned brass key attached to a faded blue ribbon. "Promise me you'll go alone. Don't tell anyone else." I took the key, confusion furrowing my brow. "Mari, what—" "Promise me," she insisted, her nails digging into my skin with surprising force. "What you find will explain everything." "I promise," I said, tucking the key into my pocket. "But you can tell me yourself when you're better." The lie felt hollow even as I spoke it. We both knew there would be no recovery, no miracle remission. The doctors had given her days at most. Marigold's eyes drifted to the window, where late afternoon sunlight cast long shadows. "I should have told you years ago. I was just so afraid." Her voice trailed off, her grip on my hand loosening. "Told me what?" I leaned closer. Her gaze returned to mine, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes. "The truth changes everything, Ellie. But you deserve to know. You always deserve to know." Those were her last words to me. Within minutes, her breathing changed, becoming more labored, then slowing until it stopped altogether. I sat there, still holding her hand as it grew cold, the brass key burning a hole in my pocket. The nurse came in 20 minutes later, her sympathetic expression telling me she'd seen this scene countless times before. She offered condolences as she checked Marigold's vitals and officially pronounced what I already knew. My sister was gone. I called Marigold's children, Juno and Hammond, to inform them of their mother's passing. Juno answered with the same cold detachment she'd shown throughout her mother's illness. "I'll handle the funeral arrangements," she said, her voice clipped and businesslike. "You don't need to concern yourself." "She was my sister," I replied, hurt by her dismissiveness. "And she was my mother, but that didn't stop her from destroying our family, did it?" Juno's bitterness sliced through the phone line. "I'll call the funeral home tomorrow." "Good night, Aunt Eleanor." She hung up before I could respond. The familiar ache of our fractured family throbbed anew. What had happened to the sweet little girl who once followed me around, begging for stories? When had she transformed into this cold, unforgiving woman? I gathered Marigold's few hospital belongings, a hairbrush, her reading glasses, a dog-eared paperback novel, and headed to the parking lot. The key felt unnaturally heavy in my pocket, its presence impossible to ignore. The drive to Marigold's house took 27 minutes, each one filled with questions. What could possibly be in that safe that was so important? Or why had she waited until her final moments to tell me about it? And why had she been so insistent that I tell no one else? Marigold's Victorian-style home stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, its gabled roof and wraparound porch giving it a forlorn appearance in the twilight. I used my spare key to enter, switching on lights as I moved through the familiar rooms. Everything was just as she'd left it 3 weeks ago when the ambulance had taken her away. A half-empty teacup in the sink, mail stacked neatly on the kitchen counter, reading glasses perched on top of a magazine. I climbed the stairs to her bedroom, each step creaking under my weight. The house felt different now, as if it already knew its owner would never return. In the master bedroom, moonlight filtered through lace curtains, casting intricate patterns across the hardwood floor. The watercolor painting of Emerald Lake hung on the wall opposite her bed, a scene from our childhood vacations that had always been her favorite. With trembling hands, I lifted the painting from its hook. Behind it, just as Marigold had said, was a small wall safe with a keyhole. I withdrew the brass key from my pocket, inserted it into the lock, and turned. The mechanism clicked and the safe door swung open. Inside lay a single manila envelope, yellowed with age, and a smaller, modern white envelope with my name written in Marigold's distinctive handwriting. I reached for the white envelope first, but my fingers brushed against something else, a stack of photographs tucked behind the manila envelope. I pulled them out and froze in horror. The first photograph showed a man's body sprawled on a kitchen floor. Blood pooled around his head. The next revealed the same scene from a different angle, clearly showing the man's face. My brother-in-law, Prescott Harrington, Marigold's ex-husband, and the father of her children. My hands shook as I flipped through the remaining photos. Each one documented the scene in methodical detail. The bloody kitchen knife on the counter, drag marks on the tile floor, blood spatter on the cabinets. In the final photo, a woman stood in the doorway, her face partially visible in the mirror behind her. Though the image was grainy, I recognized her instantly. It was me, but that was impossible. I had never witnessed such a scene. I had never been in Prescott and Marigold's kitchen while he lay dead on the floor. This had to be some sort of terrible mistake or manipulation. With my heart pounding, I tore open the white envelope with my name on it. Inside was a letter in my sister's handwriting. My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, I'm gone. First, please know that I've loved you my entire life. You were always my protector, my champion, even when I didn't deserve your loyalty. The photographs you found will shock and frighten you. They're evidence of Prescott's death 15 years ago. Evidence I've kept hidden all this time. But they don't tell the whole story, and they certainly don't tell the truth about your involvement. The manila envelope contains documents that explain everything. Read them carefully. They'll help you understand why I've kept these secrets, why our family splintered beyond repair, and why Juno and Hammond despise me, and by extension you, so deeply. I'm sorry for waiting until now to tell you. I thought I was protecting you, but I realized too late that my silence only prolonged the damage. Forgive me if you can. Your loving sister, Marigold. I stared at the letter, my mind unable to process its implications. Prescott hadn't died in a car accident 15 years ago, as everyone believed, and somehow, impossibly, these photographs suggested I was present at his actual death. With shaking hands, I reached for the manila envelope. Before I could open it, headlights swept across the bedroom window as a car pulled into the driveway. I hurried to the window and looked down to see Juno stepping out of her silver Mercedes, her husband Thaddeus right behind her. My niece had arrived much sooner than expected, and I was standing in her mother's bedroom with evidence of a crime I didn't commit but was somehow implicated in. Panic surged through me. I quickly returned the photographs and letter to the safe, locked it, and hung the painting back in place. I tucked the key and the manila envelope inside my jacket just as I heard the front door open. Aunt Eleanor? Juno's voice echoed from the foyer. Your car's outside. Are you here? I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself before calling back. I'm upstairs. I'll be right down. I gave the room a quick scan to ensure nothing looked disturbed, then headed downstairs to face my niece. Juno stood in the living room, her posture rigid and unwelcoming. At 39, she was the spitting image of Marigold at that age. Tall and elegant, with auburn hair and sharp cheekbones. Beside her, Thaddeus hovered like a watchful sentinel, his hand resting proprietarily on the small of her back. What are you doing here? Juno asked, her tone making it clear I was an intruder rather than family. I just came from the hospital, I explained, conscious of the envelope concealed inside my jacket. I wanted to pick up some of Marie's things for the funeral, her favorite scarf, perhaps her pearl earrings. Juno's eyes narrowed. I told you I'd handle the arrangements. There's no need for you to be here. She was my sister, I said again, the same words I'd spoken on the phone earlier. And she ruined our lives, Juno replied coldly. Or have you conveniently forgotten that part? I hadn't forgotten. How could I? The family had never been the same after Prescott's supposed car accident. Marigold had spiraled into depression and alcoholism. Juno and Hammond, teenagers at the time, had grown increasingly hostile toward their mother. Eventually, they'd both cut ties with her, almost completely, maintaining only the most minimal contact. What I'd never understood was why their anger had extended to me as well. Now, with the contents of the safe weighing heavily in my jacket, I was beginning to suspect there was much more to the story than I'd ever known. I think it's best if you leave, Thaddeus interjected, taking a step toward me. Juno needs space to process her grief. I almost laughed at the absurdity of his statement. Juno hadn't shown a shred of grief over her mother's death, only the same cold resentment she'd harbored for years. Of course, I conceded, knowing this wasn't the time to push. I needed to examine the contents of the manila envelope before confronting anyone. I'll be in touch about the funeral. Don't bother, Juno said. I'll send you the details when they're finalized. I left without arguing further, the envelope pressed against my ribs like a guilty secret. As I drove home, questions swirled through my mind like autumn leaves caught in a whirlwind. What really happened to Prescott? Why did photographs exist that placed me at a scene I had no memory of? And what was in the manila envelope that would explain it all? My small bungalow felt especially empty that night. At 64, I'd grown accustomed to living alone after my husband Nathaniel's death 8 years earlier. But tonight, the solitude felt oppressive rather than peaceful. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, then sat at my kitchen table and carefully opened the manila envelope. Inside was a thick medical file with my name on it. The first page was a psychiatric evaluation dated 16 years ago, a year before Prescott's death. I didn't recognize the doctor's name, nor did I recall ever having such an evaluation. As I read through the document, my confusion deepened. It described symptoms I'd never experienced, treatments I'd never undergone, and a diagnosis that sent a chill down my spine. Dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as multiple personality disorder. According to this file, I had developed several distinct personalities following a traumatic childhood event. One of these personalities, referred to simply as E, was described as protective, vigilant, and potentially violent when those she cared about were threatened. I set the paper down, my hands trembling so badly that tea sloshed over the rim of my cup. This was absurd. I had no history of mental illness, no missing time, none of the symptoms described in these reports. I would have known if I had such a severe condition. Nathaniel would have known. Marigold would have... Marigold. My eyes returned to the file. Each session note was signed by the psychiatrist and countersigned by a family monitor, M. Harrington. Marigold had apparently been present for every session, every evaluation, every diagnosis. But none of it had happened. None of it was real. I continued reading, each page more disturbing than the last. Treatment plans, medication regimens, notes about my supposed episodes and transitions between personalities. According to these records, I had been under psychiatric care for nearly 3 years, culminating in a severe episode around the time of Prescott's death. The final document in the file was the most shocking: a signed confession in what appeared to be my handwriting, admitting to killing Prescott Harrington during a dissociative episode after witnessing him physically abusing Marigold. The confession was witnessed by Marigold herself and notarized, but never submitted to the police. I stared at the signature. It looked like mine, but I had no memory of writing these words. I had no memory of killing Prescott. I had no memory of witnessing any abuse, though Marigold had occasionally appeared with suspicious bruises she'd attributed to clumsiness. What I did remember about that time was Marigold calling me, devastated, to tell me Prescott had died in a car accident on Route 27. I remembered helping her plan the funeral, supporting her through her grief, watching her slowly descend into alcoholism as she struggled to cope with her loss. I also remembered the gradual change in Juno and Hammond. Their initial grief had morphed into anger, first directed at the world, then specifically at their mother, and eventually extending to me. By the time they left for college, they barely acknowledged either of us. I'd always attributed their behavior to teenage trauma and grief, assuming they blamed Marigold for whatever marital problems had led Prescott to be driving angry that night. But if these documents were to be believed, there had been no car accident. Prescott had died in his kitchen at my hands, and Marigold had covered it up. She had created an elaborate psychiatric history for me, forged documents, and kept evidence that could send me to prison locked away in her bedroom safe for 15 years. None of it made sense. Why would my sister do this? And why reveal it only after her death? I glanced at the clock, nearly 2 a.m. Despite the late hour, I reached for my phone and dialed Hammond's number. Unlike his sister, my nephew occasionally took my calls, though our conversations were usually brief and superficial. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Aunt Eleanor? What's wrong?" "Hammond, I need to ask you something important," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you remember about the day your father died?" Silence stretched between us, so long that I thought he might have hung up. Finally he spoke, his voice cold. "Why are you asking about this now?" "After Mom just died?" "Please, Hammond, it's important." He sighed heavily. "I remember coming home from school and finding police cars in our driveway. I remember Mom sitting at the kitchen table crying while officers asked her questions. I remember her telling us later that Dad had died in a car crash." His voice grew harder, and I remember finding out years later that it was all a lie. My breath caught. "What do you mean, a lie?" "Don't pretend you don't know," Hammond said bitterly. "You were there that day. You helped her cover it up. You both betrayed us."
"Hammond, I dash dash."
"I have to go," he interrupted. "Juno told me Mom's gone. I'll come to the funeral, but don't expect anything more from me. Good night, Aunt Eleanor." The line went dead, leaving me with even more questions. Hammond believed I was there the day Prescott died. He believed I helped Marigold cover something up. But what exactly did he think happened? And how had he and Juno discovered what they believed was the truth? Sleep eluded me that night. I pored over the documents repeatedly, searching for clues, trying to reconcile my memories with this alternate reality where I had a psychiatric disorder and had committed a homicide I couldn't remember. Nothing made sense. Yet, the evidence was substantial. Psychiatric reports spanning years, detailed session notes, prescription records, and a confession in my own handwriting. By morning, exhaustion had settled into my bones like wet cement. I made strong coffee and tried to organize my thoughts. I needed more information, and there was only one person who might have answers: Dr. Abernathy Thornfield, the psychiatrist whose signature appeared throughout my supposed medical file. A quick internet search revealed that Dr. Thornfield was still practicing at Lakeside Psychiatric Associates, about an hour's drive from my home. Without allowing myself to overthink, I showered, dressed, and headed to his office. Lakeside Psychiatric was housed in a modern building overlooking a small, man-made lake. The reception area was soothing, all muted blues and soft lighting. I approached the receptionist, a young man with kind eyes and a nameplate identifying him as Kieran. "I'd like to see Dr. Thornfield, please," I said. "It's regarding a past patient." "Do you have an appointment?" Kieran asked. "No, but it's urgent." "My name is Eleanor Caldwell." I watched his face carefully for any sign of recognition, but he merely nodded and picked up his phone. After a brief conversation, he directed me to take a seat in the waiting area. 15 minutes later, a door opened and a tall man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses emerged. "Ms. Caldwell?" he inquired, his voice deep and measured. "I'm Dr. Thornfield. Please come in." I followed him to a spacious office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. He gestured for me to sit in one of 2 leather chairs facing his desk. "How can I help you today?" he asked, studying me with keen blue eyes. I placed the manila envelope on his desk. "I found these documents after my sister's death yesterday. They indicate that you treated me for dissociative identity disorder 16 years ago, but I have no recollection of ever being your patient." Dr. Thornfield's expression remained neutral as he opened the envelope and examined its contents. After several minutes of silent reading, he removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. "These files appear to be from my practice," he said carefully, "but I have never treated anyone named Eleanor Caldwell." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by confusion. "Then these records are fraudulent?" "I would need to compare them with my actual patient files to be certain," he replied, "but there are inconsistencies that concern me. The diagnostic criteria referenced here aren't consistent with how I would have documented DID cases at that time. And this signature?" He pointed to one of the forms. "It's similar to mine, but not identical. My sister's name is on these documents as a family monitor," I said. "Marigold Harrington." Recognition flickered in his eyes. Marigold Harrington was indeed my patient from approximately 17 to 20 years ago. She struggled with anxiety and depression related to her marriage. "Was her husband abusive?" I asked, thinking of the bruises, the confession, the photographs. Dr. Thornfield hesitated, clearly uncomfortable discussing a patient. "I can't discuss the specifics of her treatment. However, I will say that patients in volatile domestic situations often feel trapped and sometimes consider extreme measures to escape, such as fabricating medical records and staging a crime scene," I pressed. He frowned. "Ms. Caldwell, these are serious allegations. If you believe your sister falsified medical records and potentially committed other crimes, you should consider speaking with the authorities." I almost laughed. What would I tell them? That my dead sister had potentially framed me for a murder that was covered up 15 years ago? That the alleged victim's death had been ruled an accident, his body cremated, the case closed long ago? "Thank you for your time," I said instead, gathering the documents. "One last question. Do these files indicate what medication I was supposedly prescribed?" Dr. Thornfield glanced at the treatment plan. "According to this, you were on a combination of antipsychotics and mood stabilizers, primarily clozapine and lithium." I nodded, another piece falling into place. After Prescott's death, Marigold had started bringing me tea every evening when I visited. insisting it was a special blend to help with stress. I'd often felt unusually tired afterward. Had she been medicating me without my knowledge? As I drove home, my mind raced. If Dr. Thornfield had never treated me, it meant Marigold had created an elaborate fiction, forged medical records, a false psychiatric history, and somehow a confession in my handwriting. But to what end? If she had killed Prescott, why not simply hide the evidence? Why construct this complex alternative where I was the killer? Unless she was protecting someone else. The thought hit me with such force that I nearly missed my exit. What if Marigold hadn't killed Prescott? What if someone else had? Someone she loved enough to protect at any cost. Juno would have been 24 at the time of Prescott's death. Hammond would have been 22. Both had been living at home that year, saving money after college before starting their careers. Could one of them have killed their father? Had Marigold constructed this elaborate deception to protect her child, using me as a convenient scapegoat because of my loyalty to her? It would explain why they had turned against both of us. Not because they knew the truth, but because they suspected we were hiding something. Perhaps they had discovered evidence that contradicted the car accident story, but hadn't uncovered the full extent of Marigold's deception. I needed to speak with them, but I knew neither would talk to me willingly. I needed leverage, something to make them listen, and I needed it before Marigold's funeral, which would likely be my only opportunity to see them both face to face. When I returned home, a funeral announcement had been emailed to me. The service was scheduled for Saturday, just 3 days away, at Evergreen Memorial Chapel. No visitation, no reception afterward. Juno was clearly keeping the ceremony as brief and impersonal as possible. I spent the next day examining every detail of the documents and photographs, looking for inconsistencies or clues. The photos revealed something I'd missed initially: a reflection in the kitchen window showing someone taking the pictures. The angle suggested it wasn't the same person visible in the doorway reflection, supposedly me, but someone else documenting the scene. Who had taken these photographs, and why document a crime you were planning to cover up? By Thursday, I had developed a theory, but I needed more evidence. I drove back to Marigold's house, hoping Juno wouldn't be there. To my relief, the driveway was empty. I used my spare key to enter and headed straight for the basement. Marigold had always been a meticulous record keeper, saving everything from grocery receipts to birthday cards. If my theory was correct, she would have kept evidence to protect herself. Insurance in case her plan ever unraveled. The basement was cool and dimly lit, lined with metal shelving units containing neatly labeled boxes. I searched methodically, starting with the years surrounding Prescott's death. In a box marked Financial Records 2010, I found what I was looking for: a small journal hidden beneath tax returns and bank statements. The journal was written in Marigold's flowing script, detailing the events leading up to and following Prescott's death. According to her account, Prescott had indeed been abusive throughout their marriage, but things had escalated when he discovered Juno wasn't biologically his daughter. I sat heavily on a nearby storage trunk, stunned by this revelation. Juno had been the product of an affair Marigold had early in her marriage. Prescott had apparently uncovered this secret when Juno was 24 and had threatened to disinherit her, expose her paternity publicly, and divorce Marigold without a penny. The confrontation had turned violent. Prescott had attacked Marigold, and Hammond had intervened, striking his father with a kitchen knife in defense of his mother. It had been unplanned, an act of desperate protection rather than premeditated murder. Marigold's journal detailed the panic that followed, Hammond's breakdown, her decision to protect him by staging a car accident, and her realization that they needed a contingency plan in case the truth ever came out. That's where I had come in. She had created the psychiatric file, forged the confession, and taken the photographs as a form of protection. If authorities ever questioned the car accident, she would produce evidence that I, suffering from a psychiatric disorder, had killed Prescott. She had even started drugging my tea, both to make me appear unstable if necessary and to ensure I wouldn't notice inconsistencies in the story. What she hadn't anticipated was that Juno would discover Hammond's involvement years later. According to the journal, Hammond had confessed to his sister during a drunken argument 5 years after their father's death. Juno, already feeling betrayed by the revelation about her paternity, had turned against both Hammond and Marigold, threatening to go to the police. To prevent this, Marigold had revealed her contingency plan, showing Juno the evidence implicating me. This had apparently been enough to silence Juno, who didn't want to risk an investigation that might reveal the messy truth about her family, including her own paternity. The journal ended with Marigold's expression of remorse, not for protecting Hammond, but for involving me in her deception and driving a wedge between me and her children, who now believed I had helped cover up their father's murder. I closed the journal, my hands shaking. My sister had been willing to frame me for murder to protect her son. She had drugged me, forged documents in my name, and allowed her children to hate me for 15 years based on a lie. Yet even knowing this, I couldn't summon true anger toward her. Marigold had been trapped in an abusive marriage, trying to protect her children the only way she knew how. Her methods were deplorable, but her motives were born of desperation rather than malice. The sound of a car in the driveway jolted me back to the present. I quickly returned the journal to its hiding place, rearranged the boxes to hide evidence of my search, and hurried upstairs. Through the front window, I saw Juno exiting her car, her expression grim. There was no time to slip out unnoticed. When she entered, her surprise quickly transformed to suspicion. "What are you doing here?" "Again?" "I came to drop off some old photos of Marigold for the funeral display," I lied, holding up an envelope of photographs I'd brought as a pretense. The door was unlocked, so I let myself in. Juno's eyes narrowed. She clearly didn't believe me, but she took the envelope without comment. "The funeral is at 11 on Saturday." "Try not to make a scene." "I would never," I assured her, moving toward the door. "Marigold deserves a dignified farewell." "Does she?" Juno's voice was razor sharp. "After everything she did?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "We all do things we regret when we're trying to protect the people we love." Something flickered in Juno's eyes, uncertainty perhaps, or a hint of the vulnerability she worked so hard to conceal. "Some things are unforgivable," she said finally. "Perhaps," I agreed, "but understanding why they happened can help us move forward. Your mother loved you and Hammond more than anything in this world." "She had a strange way of showing it," Juno replied bitterly. I wanted to tell her everything then, about the journal, about Hammond's role in Prescott's death, about her own paternity. But revealing those truths now, without preparation or privacy, would only cause more pain and anger. Instead, I simply said, "I hope someday you'll be willing to hear the whole story, Juno. There's more to what happened than you know." Before she could respond, I left, feeling her eyes on my back as I walked to my car. The confrontation I'd been avoiding was inevitable now, but the funeral was not the place for it. I needed to speak with Hammond first, to understand what he remembered and what he'd told his sister. Finding Hammond proved more difficult than I'd anticipated. He didn't answer my calls or texts, and his modest apartment in the city was dark when I drove by that evening. As a last resort, I contacted his workplace, an architectural firm where he'd been employed for the past decade, only to be told he had taken bereavement leave until Monday. With no other options, I decided to wait until the funeral to approach him. The service itself was as brief and impersonal as I'd expected, a standard eulogy delivered by a minister who had never met Marigold, a few generic hymns, and a sparse gathering of attendees. Juno sat in the front row with Thaddeus, her posture rigid and her expression frozen in practiced solemnity. Hammond sat alone on the opposite side of the aisle, his face haggard, his eyes red-rimmed, either from grief or lack of sleep. I took a seat in the middle, aware of curious glances from the few distant relatives and former colleagues who had attended. Everyone knew about the family rift, though no one knew its true cause. To them, I was just the loyal sister who had stood by Marigold despite her descent into alcoholism and erratic behavior following her husband's tragic accident. After the service, as people filtered out to their cars, I approached Hammond in the parking lot. He was fumbling with his keys, his hands shaking slightly. "Hammond?" I called softly, not wanting to startle him. He turned, his expression guarded. "Aunt Eleanor, I assumed you'd try to talk to me today. Can we go somewhere?" "Just for a little while," I pleaded. "There are things you need to know. About your father. About what really happened." His laugh was hollow. "What really happened? You mean how my mother covered up his murder and made us believe it was an accident for years? How you helped her hide the truth from us? I already know all that." "No," I said firmly. "You don't." "Please, Hammond, 30 minutes. That's all I'm asking." He stared at me for a long moment, conflict evident in his eyes. Finally, he nodded toward his car. "There's a coffee shop 2 blocks down. I'll meet you there." The coffee shop was nearly empty, the mid-afternoon lull providing us with privacy and a back corner booth. Hammond ordered black coffee. I couldn't stomach anything. Once the server left, I placed Marigold's journal on the table between us. "What's this?" he asked, not touching it. "Your mother's account of what happened the day your father died," I replied. "I found it in her basement yesterday." Hammond's face paled. I don't need to read her excuses. I know what happened. "Do you?" I challenged gently. "Do you remember striking your father with a kitchen knife when he was attacking your mother?" The coffee cup slipped from his fingers, spilling dark liquid across the table. He didn't seem to notice, his eyes fixed on my face in horror. "What are you talking about?" he whispered. "According to Marigold's journal, you intervened when Prescott was assaulting her. You grabbed a knife and struck him in self-defense. Hers, not yours." I pushed napkins toward the spreading coffee. "She covered it up to protect you, Hammond. She staged the car accident, created the psychiatric file, making me the potential suspect. All of it. To ensure you wouldn't face charges for protecting her." Hammond's hands trembled as he mopped up the spilled coffee. "That's not possible," he insisted. "I wasn't even home when he died." "I was at the library studying for finals. Juno was the one who called to tell me about the accident." I frowned. "Then why did you tell me on the phone that you came home and found police cars in the driveway?" "Because that's what happened the next day," Hammond explained. "The police came to ask Mom follow-up questions about the accident." That's what I remembered, coming home from campus and finding officers in our house. He shook his head in confusion. But years later, Juno told me it wasn't an accident at all. She said Mom had killed him during a fight and that you helped her cover it up. I pushed the journal toward him. "Read it," I urged. "Read what your mother wrote." Hammond hesitated, then pulled the journal closer. As he read, his expression shifted from skepticism to shock, to something approaching horror. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet. "This can't be true," he said hoarsely. "I don't remember any of this." And Juno, she was so certain. "Memory is fragile, Hammond," I said gently, "especially traumatic memory. It's possible you blocked out what happened. It's also possible that Marigold's account isn't entirely accurate. She was trying to protect you, maybe from the truth, maybe from yourself. And Juno isn't my father's biological daughter?" he asked, his voice barely audible. I nodded. According to the journal, that's what triggered his final outburst. He had discovered her paternity and threatened to disinherit her. "Divorce your mother without financial support." Hammond ran a hand over his face. This explains so much. Why Juno was always his favorite, until suddenly she wasn't. Why everything changed that last year. He looked at me with new eyes. And you? Were you really there that day? No, I said firmly. I had nothing to do with your father's death or the cover-up. Marigold created a backup plan that implicated me in case the accident story ever fell apart. She even drugged my tea for months to make me appear unstable if necessary. But why would she implicate you? Her own sister? Because I was the only one she trusted completely, I explained, and because I had no children of my own to protect. In her mind, sacrificing me to save you and Juno would have been the lesser evil. Hammond closed the journal, his expression troubled. What do we do now? Juno still believes. We need to talk to her, I said. All of us, together. This has poisoned our family for 15 years. It's time for the truth. Whatever that truth turns out to be. Convincing Juno to meet with us proved nearly impossible. She refused Hammond's initial call, then rejected his text messages. Finally, he resorted to ambush, asking me to meet him at her house that evening. When we arrived, Thaddeus answered the door, his expression darkening at the sight of us together. Juno doesn't want to see either of you right now, he stated flatly. Hammond pushed past him. This isn't optional, Thad. Where is she? We found Juno in the living room, a glass of wine in hand, her funeral clothes exchanged for casual wear. She looked up in surprise, which quickly transformed to anger. What are you doing here? Both of you? Her gaze darted between us, betrayal evident in her eyes as she registered our apparent alliance. We need to talk about Dad, Hammond said, taking a seat across from her. About what really happened the day he died? Juno's laugh was brittle. Now you want to talk? After 15 years of silence? I found Mom's journal, Hammond continued, placing it on the coffee table. It tells a different story than the one you told me. Of course it does, Juno snapped. She was a liar until the end. I remained standing, observing the siblings' interaction. Juno, I said gently, what do you actually remember about that day? Not what you were told later, but what you personally witnessed. She turned to me, her expression hostile. I remember coming home early from work and hearing shouting in the kitchen. I remember seeing Dad on the floor, blood everywhere, and Mom standing over him with a knife. I remember her calling you, and you arriving within minutes, like you were expecting the call. Her voice rose. I remember hiding in the hallway while you two discussed what to do, how to make it look like an accident, how to protect poor, fragile Juno from the truth. And where was Hammond during all this? I asked. Juno faltered. He wasn't home. He came back later, after you both had cleaned everything up. So you never saw me strike your father, I clarified. You only saw the aftermath and heard a conversation. I know what I heard, she insisted. And I know what Mom wrote, Hammond countered, pushing the journal toward her. She says I killed Dad while defending her from an attack, that she covered it up to protect me, not herself, that she created a contingency plan implicating Aunt Eleanor in case the truth ever came out. Juno stared at the journal, not touching it. That's absurd. You weren't even there. Maybe I was, Hammond said quietly. Maybe I've blocked it out. Or maybe Mom's version isn't accurate either, but I think we owe it to ourselves to consider all possibilities. The tension in the room was palpable as Juno finally picked up the journal. She read in silence, her face growing paler with each page. When she finished, she closed it carefully, her hands trembling slightly. This is convenient, she said, but the certainty had drained from her voice. A journal appearing right after she dies, telling a story that absolves her of murder. It doesn't absolve her of deception, I pointed out. If anything, it reveals the extent of her manipulation, of all of us. Juno turned to me, her eyes searching my face. You really didn't know? All these years? I knew nothing until I opened that safe, I confirmed. Marigold kept me in the dark, just as she kept you both from the full truth. A heavy silence fell over the room. Thaddeus hovered in the doorway, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding before him. Finally, Hammond spoke again. "There's one more thing, Juno." "Something else the journal reveals." He glanced at me uncertainly. I nodded, encouraging him to continue. Juno deserved to know everything, however painful. According to Mom's account, the reason Dad was so angry that day was because he'd discovered you weren't biologically his daughter, Hammond said gently. Apparently, Mom had an affair early in their marriage. Juno's face drained of color. "That's a lie," she whispered. "Another one of her lies." "It would explain a lot," Hammond continued. "Why Dad always favored me until that last year. Why he suddenly changed his will, removing you as a beneficiary." "He changed his will because he was planning to divorce Mom," Juno insisted, "because he knew what she was capable of." "Or because he discovered you weren't his biological child and felt betrayed," I suggested. "Prescott was many things, but he valued blood relations above all else. Remember how he treated your cousin Rowan after he discovered he was adopted?" Juno flinched at the memory. Rowan had been Prescott's favorite nephew until learning of his adoption at 18. Overnight, Prescott had cut him off completely, refusing even to acknowledge him at family gatherings. "If this is true," Juno said slowly, "then who is my biological father?" I shook my head. "The journal doesn't say." "Only that it was a brief affair, during a rough patch in their marriage." Juno's composure finally cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks as years of certainty crumbled around her. "I don't know what to believe anymore," she whispered. "I've built my entire life around hating her. Hating both of you for what I thought you did." Hammond moved to sit beside his sister, hesitantly placing an arm around her shoulders. She didn't pull away. "Maybe none of us knows the whole truth," he acknowledged. "Maybe we never will. But we can stop letting it destroy what's left of our family." As I watched my niece and nephew, these damaged, hurting adults who had once been joyful children I adored, I felt a profound sadness for all we had lost to Marigold's deception. Yet beneath the sadness was a flicker of hope. The truth, however painful, was finally emerging from the shadows. "There may be a way to confirm some of this," I said cautiously. "The photographs in Marigold's safe, they show reflections. One appears to be me in the doorway, though I have no memory of being there. Another shows someone taking the pictures. If we examine them more carefully, we might be able to determine who was actually present." Juno looked up, her expression transforming from grief to determination. "I want to see them," she declared. "All of them. Every piece of evidence Marigold left behind." The next morning, the three of us met at Marigold's house. I opened the safe, removing the photographs and spreading them across the dining room table. Juno and Hammond examined each one carefully, their expressions grim. "This reflection," Hammond said, pointing to the kitchen window in one image, "it's too tall to be Mom. And the build is wrong for Aunt Eleanor." He looked up at his sister. "It could be me." Juno scrutinized the photograph, then reached for another. "And this one with the figure in the doorway." She frowned, bringing it closer to her face. "The person is wearing Mom's cardigan, her green one with the embroidered sleeves. But look at the hands." She passed me the photo. "Those aren't her hands." I studied the image. The hands visible at the edge of the frame were indeed wrong for Marigold. The fingers too short, the knuckles too pronounced. They looked more like, "Those are my hands," I whispered, recognition dawning with horror. "But that's impossible." "I wasn't there." "Unless you were," Hammond said quietly. "But don't remember." The implication hung in the air between us. What if Marigold hadn't fabricated my psychiatric condition entirely? What if there was some truth to her claims about my dissociative episodes? "I would know if I had a mental illness that severe," I protested. "Nathaniel would have noticed something during our marriage." Not necessarily, Hammond replied. I've studied psychology extensively for my rehabilitation projects. DID can present in highly compartmentalized ways. Some people function normally for years with no one suspecting anything is wrong. I don't have missing time, I insisted. I don't wake up in strange places or find evidence of things I don't remember doing. Except for a confession in your handwriting that you don't recall writing, Juno pointed out, her voice gentler than I'd heard in years. And these photographs placing you at a scene you don't remember attending. My certainty wavered. Could it be possible? Had I somehow blocked out involvement in Prescott's death? Had Marigold been protecting me rather than using me as a scapegoat? There's one way to find out, Hammond said, reaching for his phone. Dr. Thornfield. If he really was Mom's psychiatrist, not yours, he might have notes about her concerns regarding your mental health. He wouldn't discuss another patient's records, I reminded him. Doctor-patient confidentiality. No, but he might speak to you about your own mental health history if you signed a release, Hammond suggested. If Mom ever expressed concerns about you to him, he could at least confirm whether she consulted him about DID symptoms she observed in her sister. The suggestion was reasonable, but it filled me with dread. Part of me didn't want to know if there was truth behind Marigold's claims. I had spent 64 years believing I knew who I was. A kindergarten teacher, a devoted wife, a loyal sister. The possibility that there might be parts of myself hidden even from my own awareness was terrifying. But the alternative, continuing to live with uncertainty, with the possibility that I had been involved in a homicide I couldn't remember, was worse. Make the appointment, I agreed. Dr. Thornfield agreed to see me the following afternoon. This time, Hammond and Juno accompanied me, their presence both comforting and unsettling. We had shifted from adversaries to reluctant allies, united in our quest for truth, even as we feared what that truth might be. After I signed the release forms, Dr. Thornfield retrieved a thick file from his cabinet. These are my records of Marigold Harrington's treatment, he explained. She was my patient for approximately 3 years, from 2007 to 2010. Did she ever discuss concerns about me during her sessions? I asked. Specifically, about potential psychiatric symptoms I might have exhibited? Dr. Thornfield nodded, his expression grave. She frequently expressed concern about your dissociative episodes, which reportedly began in childhood after your parents' deaths. According to her accounts, you would sometimes appear to become a different person entirely, more assertive, more protective, particularly when you felt she was threatened. My stomach clenched. But that's not true, I protested. Our parents died when I was 17, and Marigold was 15. We went to live with our aunt. There were no episodes. That's not entirely accurate, Hammond interjected gently. Mom used to tell stories about how you changed after your parents died. How you would sometimes speak differently, act differently, especially when someone upset her. She called it your guardian mode. That's just being protective of my younger sister, I insisted. It's not a psychiatric condition. Dr. Thornfield continued. Marigold believed your dissociative identity, which she referred to as E, had emerged to protect her during your difficult adolescence. She reported that E would appear during times of stress, particularly when Marigold herself was in danger. Did my sister ever suggest that this alternate personality was violent? I asked, dreading the answer. Dr. Thornfield hesitated. She did express concern about E's protective instincts becoming potentially dangerous, especially as her marriage deteriorated. She feared that if her husband's abuse escalated, your protective personality might intervene with unpredictable consequences. Juno leaned forward. Did my mother ever confess to you that my father had died, not in a car accident, but in their home? That either she or my aunt or my brother might have been involved? Dr. Thornfield closed the file. Mrs. Harrington terminated her treatment rather abruptly in March 2010, shortly before her husband's reported death. Our final session was tense. She was agitated, expressed fear for her safety, and concern about her sister's increasingly protective behavior. I recommended a safety plan, including potential separation from her husband, but she insisted she could handle the situation. He met Juno's gaze directly. She never returned after that session, and I learned of Mr. Harrington's death through local news reports. The circumstances always troubled me, but without evidence of foul play, there was nothing I could report to authorities. We left Dr. Thornfield's office with more questions than answers. The drive back to Marigold's house was silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The possibility that I had an undiagnosed psychiatric condition, one severe enough to create an alternate personality capable of violence, was devastating. Yet it explained so much. The photos, the confession, Marigold's elaborate deception. "What now?" Hammond asked as we gathered once more in Marigold's living room. "Do we go to the police?" After 15 years, with no body and questionable evidence? "And say what?" Juno added. "That we're not sure who killed Dad, but it might have been any one of us. Mom, Aunt Eleanor, or you. That we've been covering it up for over a decade?" I sank into an armchair, suddenly feeling every one of my 64 years. "I need to know the truth," I said. "Not just about what happened to Prescott, but about myself. If I really do have this condition, if there's a part of me capable of violence that I'm not aware of." "There may be one more person who knows what happened," Hammond suggested. "Someone who wasn't mentioned in Mom's journal, but who might have witnessed the events of that day." Juno frowned. "Who?" "Vivica Morales," Hammond replied. "She was cleaning houses in the neighborhood back then. I remember she was working at the Petersons' place next door the day Dad died. She might have seen something." Finding Vivica proved surprisingly easy. She now owned a successful cleaning company with her daughter and was listed in the local business directory. Hammond called and explained that we were sorting through family matters following his mother's death and needed to ask her about something she might have witnessed years earlier. To our surprise, she agreed to meet us that evening at a restaurant near her home. Vivica was in her 60s now, with streaks of silver in her dark hair and eyes that held the wisdom of someone who had observed life's complexities from the margins. She greeted Hammond warmly, nodded politely to Juno, and studied me with open curiosity. After we ordered drinks, Hammond explained our situation in carefully vague terms, that we were trying to piece together the events surrounding his father's death 15 years earlier, and that we believed she might have seen something while working at the neighbor's house. Vivica sipped her iced tea, her expression unreadable. "I wondered if any of you would ever ask," she said finally. "It was not my business, so I kept silent. But yes, I saw what happened that day." The three of us exchanged glances. "What exactly did you see?" Noni Juno asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was cleaning the upstairs windows at the Peterson house," Vivica began. "From there, I could see into your parents' kitchen. I saw your father shouting, gesturing wildly. Your mother was crying, trying to calm him down. Then he hit her, hard enough that she fell against the counter." Hammond's face paled. "What happened next?" "You came in," Vivica said, looking directly at him. "You tried to get between them, to protect your mother. Your father pushed you aside and grabbed a knife from the counter. To threaten, I think, not to use. But in the struggle, he fell. The knife." She made a stabbing motion toward her chest. "It was an accident, I believe." "A terrible accident." "And after that?" I pressed, desperate to understand my own role in this tragedy. "The three of you panicked," Vivica continued. "You tried to help him, to stop the bleeding, but it was too late. Then your mother called someone. About 20 minutes later, you arrived," she said, nodding toward me. "By then they had covered him with a tablecloth. The four of you talked for a long time. Then you and your sister started cleaning while the children sat at the table, in shock, I think. Later, 2 men came, I didn't recognize them, and removed something large wrapped in plastic. The next day, I heard about the car accident. I exhaled slowly, relief washing over me. I hadn't been present for Prescott's death. I hadn't witnessed the stabbing or participated in it. I had only arrived afterward, helping Marigold clean up and presumably arrange the false accident scene. Did my mother seem different when she arrived? Juno asked hesitantly. Did she act like another person? Vivica frowned thoughtfully. She was very calm, very controlled, not like I had seen her before. She took charge immediately, telling everyone what to do. It was as if, she paused, searching for the right words. It was as if she became another person, stronger, more decisive. Your mother always seemed nervous around your father, but this woman showed no fear. My relief evaporated. Vivica's description matched exactly what Hammond had called my guardian mode, the personality change Marigold had reportedly observed throughout our lives. Had my alternate personality, this E, emerged to help cover up the death, even if I hadn't caused it? Did you take photographs? I asked suddenly, remembering the evidence from the safe. Or see anyone taking pictures of the scene? Vivica shook her head. No, I saw no cameras. But I was not watching constantly. I had my work to finish, and I did not want to be caught spying. As we drove back to Marigold's house, a new theory began forming in my mind. What if some of Marigold's claims were true, but not all of them? What if I did have a dissociative condition, but it wasn't as severe as she had documented? What if the photographs had been staged later, with me unconsciously participating during an episode triggered by Marigold's distress? I think I understand what happened, I said as we gathered in Marigold's living room. Prescott died accidentally during a struggle with Hammond, just as Vivica described. Marigold called me for help, triggering what may indeed be a protective alternate personality. This E helped her clean up and arrange the false accident. Later, perhaps days or weeks afterward, Marigold realized they needed insurance, evidence implicating someone else in case the truth ever came out. So she staged the photographs, Juno concluded. She dressed you in her clothes, positioned you in the scene, and documented a version of events that never actually happened. Exactly, I said. The photos don't show the real crime scene. They show a reconstruction with me as the supposed killer. She probably took them during one of my episodes, when I was suggestible and unlikely to form conscious memories of the event. Hammond ran a hand through his hair. But why go to such elaborate lengths? Why not just rely on the accident story? Because she knew it might not hold up forever, I explained. Accidents are investigated. Evidence can be questioned. She needed a backup plan, one that would protect both of you at any cost. Juno's expression softened. She really would have sacrificed you to save us, wouldn't she? Her own sister? I nodded, understanding Marigold's motivations with perfect clarity now. That's what mothers do, I said simply. They protect their children, no matter the cost. I might have done the same in her position. A heavy silence fell over the room as we each processed the implications of what we'd learned. After 15 years of secrets and misunderstandings, the truth was finally emerging. Not the clean, simple truth any of us had imagined, but a messy, complicated reality where no one was entirely innocent or entirely guilty. What do we do now? Hammond asked eventually. Go to the police? Try to explain what happened 15 years ago? I shook my head. The case is closed. Prescott's death was ruled an accident, his body cremated. There's no physical evidence remaining, only our contradictory accounts and Marigold's manipulated documentation. Reopening the investigation would destroy what's left of this family without serving any real justice. So we just move on? Juno sounded incredulous. Pretend none of this happened? Not pretend, I corrected. Accept. Accept that your father died in a tragic accident while threatening your mother. Accept that Hammond acted instinctively to protect her. Accept that Marigold made terrible choices afterward, but always with the intention of protecting her children. And accept that you have a psychiatric condition you never knew about, Hammond added gently. I nodded, the reality of my situation finally sinking in. I need to understand that part of myself better, to get proper treatment and learn to recognize the warning signs of an episode. I'll help you find a specialist, Hammond offered, someone who understands DID and can provide appropriate therapy. Juno, who had been silent for several minutes, finally spoke. And I need to find out who my biological father is. She looked at me questioningly. Did Mom ever mention anything to you? Any clues about who it might be? I searched my memories, trying to recall any hint Marigold might have dropped over the years. There was someone before Prescott, I said slowly. A college boyfriend named Thatcher. She was heartbroken when they broke up, and she married your father on the rebound just a few months later. I hesitated. The timing would be right. Juno nodded, absorbing this information. I'll try to find him. I need to know that part of my history at least. As the sun set, casting long shadows through Marigold's living room, the three of us sat together in the first peaceful silence we'd shared in 15 years. The weight of secrets still pressed upon us, but it was a shared burden now, no longer dividing us. I've spent so many years hating Mom, Juno said softly, hating you both. I'm not sure I know how to stop. You don't have to forgive everything at once, I told her. Just be open to seeing her, seeing all of us as complex, flawed people who made mistakes while trying to protect the ones we loved. Hammond reached for his sister's hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. We're still family, he said. Despite everything, that hasn't changed. In the months that followed, we began the slow, painful process of rebuilding our fractured family. I started therapy with a specialist in dissociative disorders, gradually coming to understand and accept the parts of myself I'd never known existed. My protective alternate personality, E, wasn't a monster or a murderer. She was a guardian who had emerged in childhood to shield both me and Marigold from trauma after our parents' death. With proper treatment, I learned to recognize the triggers that caused her to surface and to integrate her strength into my conscious identity. Juno succeeded in locating Thatcher Rhodes, who confirmed through DNA testing that he was indeed her biological father. Their reunion was cautious but promising, giving Juno a new understanding of her origins and a chance to know the gentle, artistic man whose features she shared. Hammond threw himself into renovating Marigold's house, transforming it from a place of secrets and painful memories into a home where our healing family could gather. He restored the kitchen completely, erasing all traces of the tragedy that had occurred there, and converted Marigold's bedroom into a sunlit studio where Juno could pursue the painting talent she'd inherited from her biological father. As for me, I finally opened the small white envelope that had been tucked behind the photographs in Marigold's safe, the one addressed specifically to me that I'd read only partially before Juno's arrival interrupted me. The complete letter contained not just explanations, but a heartfelt apology. My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, I'm gone. First, please know that I've loved you my entire life. You were always my protector, my champion, even when I didn't deserve your loyalty. The photographs you found will shock and frighten you. They're evidence of Prescott's death 15 years ago, evidence I've kept hidden all this time. But they don't tell the whole story, and they certainly don't tell the truth about your involvement. The manila envelope contains documents that explain everything. Read them carefully. They'll help you understand why I've kept these secrets, why our family splintered beyond repair, and why Juno and Hammond despise me, and by extension you, so deeply. I'm sorry for waiting until now to tell you. I thought I was protecting you, but I realized too late that my silence only prolonged the damage. What you must understand is that I never intended to hurt you. When Prescott died, when Hammond accidentally struck him during that terrible confrontation, I panicked. I called you because you were always the one I turned to in crisis. When you arrived, something changed in you, the way it always did when I was in danger. You became calm, focused, almost a different person entirely. You helped me clean up, arrange the false accident, protect my children. Later, I realized we needed insurance against discovery. I staged the photographs when you were in one of your protective states, positioning you as if you had been present at the time of death. I created the psychiatric file to establish a history of dissociation that could explain your actions if necessary. I even took your handwriting samples to forge the confession. It was unforgivable, I know. I manipulated your condition, a condition you weren't even aware you had, to create a fall person in case my children were ever threatened. A mother's love can be terribly selfish. My greatest regret is that my actions drove Juno and Hammond away from both of us. When they discovered fragments of the truth years later, they assumed we had conspired together. They couldn't understand that you were as much a victim of my deception as they were. If there's anything to salvage from this wreckage I've created, let it be your relationship with my children. Show them this letter. Help them understand that you never knowingly participated in any cover-up. Perhaps in time, they can forgive you, even if they never forgive me. I've loved you all my life, Ellie. From our earliest childhood, through our parents' deaths, through all the years that followed. You were always my protector. I'm sorry I repaid that protection with betrayal. Forgive me if you can. Your loving sister, Marigold. I shared the letter with Juno and Hammond on a quiet Sunday afternoon, 6 months after Marigold's funeral. We sat on the porch of what had once been her house, but was now becoming something new, a family home again, built on truth rather than secrets. She loved you both so much, I told them as they finished reading. Everything she did, however misguided, was to protect you. Juno wiped away a tear. I wish I'd known. I wish we could have talked about all of this while she was still alive. She was too afraid, Hammond said quietly, afraid of losing you both, afraid of facing consequences, afraid the truth would hurt more than the lies. Was she right? I asked. Would the truth have been worse? Juno considered this, her expression thoughtful. Maybe at first, but living with these secrets poisoned us all for 15 years. The truth is painful, but at least it's real. As we sat together on that porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, I felt Marigold's presence around us. Not as a ghost or a spirit, but as the missing piece of our family puzzle, flawed, complicated, but ultimately understood. The safe that had held her secrets was empty now, its contents exposed to the light. The truth had been painful, messy, and far more complex than any of us had imagined. But in that complexity, we had found something unexpected, not just answers, but a path forward. A chance to rebuild what had been broken, to heal wounds that had festered for too long in darkness. In the end, that was Marigold's final gift to us. Not the secrets she had kept, but the truth she had finally allowed us to discover. And in that truth, painful as it was, we found our way back to each other.